I think what Bill has said is absolutely right in terms of having to focus on where the attacks are at any one time and saying, that could be me, that these are your brothers and sisters, and we should join together in supporting them any way we can. In terms of people joining political parties and that kind of thing, I think one reason people don't join political parties so much now in a way that they might have done, I don't know, in the 50s and 60s perhaps, is that the ideas of the market solving all the problems, the ideas of neoliberalism have become the dominant ideas of all the major parties, right across Europe, right around the world for that matter. And therefore, if a party that you perhaps supported in the past really wants to implement cuts, is singing the same song as your boss, what is the point of voting for them? And that's a major issue. Why haven't people joining parties in the way that they did? Because they think they're not represented. And this comes back to, if you like, a crisis of working class representation in Britain, which we've seen. We've seen the far right recently in the form of UKIP benefiting from some of that. And that comes down to these same sort of questions. Are we organising together? Can we get political representation together or not? And that partly leads to the fragmentation and if you like, focusing on campaigns rather than organisations that take on all of these issues at once. I think that's partly the answer to this.
Anybody else want to come in?
I mean, I completely agree with what Duncan is saying there, that the reason I think that people aren't joining political parties is because political parties are not offering the solutions that people want. But I think I like to kind of remain the eternal optimist. And if you look at the room this morning and this afternoon, it's full of people who do want to partake in opposition to what's happening. And I think that what we've seen in Edinburgh Save Our Services is what we've organised, 3, 4 public meetings now. And in each one, we've had like 100 people come along to that. And I think that reflects the fact that people do want to engage in things. It's just that the political parties, unfortunately, are not the ones that they want to engage with.
But I think there's fundamental problems that all the mainstream political parties are up against. I mean, neoliberalism is one of the biggest problems. I mean, Britain as a state cannot do, the government cannot do what it wants to do, what its electorate might want it to do, because of the fear of what global capital will say, because the government's borrowing money in international money markets. So until we tackle some of these really kind of fundamental problems, it's going to be very, very difficult to organise, to resist.
What's the answer, state funding?
No, I mean, I think the answer is in a much more localised democratisation of power. I mean, for example, in Germany, 40% of German banks are owned by local authorities, Sparkassen. Another 35% are co-ops and mutuals, right? Now, in Britain, 90% of banks are just 5 big banks, and look what they did. And they did it to everybody. So we need to get back to more robust institutions, yeah, that are going to be capable of withstanding these kind of storms. I think that's one of the main problems. And then just briefly on the NHS, I mean, I think there's a crisis in the NHS. The fact is that people are not living longer purely because of the NHS. That's helping. It's keeping people alive a little bit longer. But the NHS doesn't determine people's health. That's determined by having a good job with rewarding work, a good quality place to live in, and a good community to support you. That's what health is about. And the NHS has increasingly become a national sickness service. So I think a lot of the institutions we built up 50 and 60 years ago do need reform. And I think we have to face up to that. That doesn't mean to say they should be turned upside down or privatised or whatever, but the things that they're attempting to do. I mean, in the immediate post-war period, the Scottish Office had a department called the Scottish Home and Health Department, right? The idea was that we would plan for housing to give people healthy places to live. That lasted 6 years, then it disappeared. And there was an incredible vision in the 50s about linking these things up. And I think that's part of the problem. We've lost those kind of linkages that there are between, for example, health and where people live. And we're living in, you know, some of the crappiest housing in the whole of Europe, even the new stuff that's being built.
Let's not miss the fact we're having this discussion in the very week that is the 70th anniversary of the Beveridge Report being published. This week is the very week of it. In fact, I'm not sure it's not today, but it's 70 years ago this week. That's how far we've travelled. Sasha, I wonder if I can pick up with you one of the points that Andy just made. Andy referred to the bankers. And I think some of us had a moment of hope when all of that was going on, that dislike of that sort of greed had suddenly become mainstreamed in our politics. Whereas in the 80s, we were all taught greed is good, and it's a sign of the country getting on. When Fred Goodwin fell and Andy Hornby fell, I think there was many of us thought there is a feeling right across society that these guys have had it coming and that something better needs to take its place. Any sign yet that it's happening?
Oh goodness, I'm going to be like Duncan. I'd say absolutely none. I mean, when it really comes down to it, yes, there was that slight upsurge in, I think, distaste is probably the right word, at some of the excess, some of the greed, and some of the ignorance and arrogance of the people in society who have the gall to tell us that the poor should take risks when they are the ones who have risked our future because of their recklessness with giving money to zombie corporations. And I don't remember ever giving somebody a subprime mortgage, right? You know, I don't think it's my fault that the American banking system collapsed, funnily enough, and I don't think it's the fault of anybody in this room. Now, I mean, that window of opportunity went. That's not to say it can't be got back, but, you know, David Cameron and the Condems, I mean, whatever you might think of them, and I think they're a bunch of bastards personally, but anyway, yeah. When I look at David Cameron, he is a consummate professional, if nothing else. That's what going to Eton gives you, right? It gives you attitude, and it gives you the confidence to be like a conjurer, right? And on the one hand, he's pulling a rabbit out of a hat, and we're all looking at it, right? And, oh, we'll give you a little bit of reform, so everybody looks at that. And the other hand is doing the trick of actually just giving loads of money to his friends in corporations, selling off anything that moves. And let's be truthful, they have no stomach for tackling the banking crisis, and they don't want to do it anyway, right? So believing that they're going to change anything is naive. Believing that neoliberalism can't be challenged is another matter, I mean, because it patently can. I mean, the situation is on the verge of collapse, right? It's how close we are to the tipping point that we need to consider, and I think we are pretty close to it. When David Freud castigates us, right, as poor people, by saying that we're too cowardly to take risks, and we are the people who should take risks because we have the least to lose, he better be careful that doesn't come around and bite him on the arse, quite frankly, because when you've got nothing to lose, you've got everything to gain. Right, and that's what I see as the challenge to neoliberalism, because quite frankly, if we don't stand up to these people who are a bunch of bullies, as that lady said in the top row, we might just as well lay down and die, right? And let's be quite clear, there's very few bankers. In fact, the top bankers could probably fit in this room. There's an awful lot more of us than there are of them, and that's the first thing we need to remember.
Thanks very much. That tees up extremely nicely the question I was wanting to put to Cami, actually, which comes from one of the other workshops. I'm sorry, I don't know which one it is, but the question was, what does this conference feel about taking direct action? The example they give is to defend tenants from government-induced and unjust eviction. But let's raise this question of direct action anyway. We've heard that there's disillusionment with political parties. We've heard there's more of us than there are of them. Cami, as somebody who represents elected authority, are you supportive of the idea of direct action, or does it undermine democracy? Discuss.
Okay. It's a topical debate. Could I just quickly touch on another 2 points before I answer this one, is about political parties. And I will come to this one. That I think it's unfortunate we put all political parties and politicians into one batch. I think there are some of us that do listen to communities. The fact that today the only politicians who have bothered to come to this kind of event are you two local Labour councillors and one of our Green councillors and our Labour MSP. It shows that some people are prepared to listen. I'm not pretending that we're going to change the world, but at least we're listening to see what we can do here locally. And I absolutely agree with Sasha that the banking system, along with the Tory Condé government, are all a bunch of bastards. But what do you expect from 85% in the Cabinet Office are millionaires? No, they have no experience living in working class estates like most of the people here today. On direct action, you know, my background as a community development worker here in North Edinburgh has been exactly that we work with communities from grassroots to stand up against people like me now, to politicians, to the establishment, to challenge things that are going wrong. So absolutely, I agree that encouraging local people to make their voice heard is really important. And some things that we're doing in the council just now, and again, I'm not pretending it's ideal, but it's a step in the direction of trying to involve people in how their council is run. We now have an open petitions committee, which is chaired by Councillor Chapman here today. And that's an opportunity for local people to say, we're not happy about what's happening here. We want to have a policy discussion on how that can change. And also that we're opening up the budget committee for a local discussion. And again, I said that in one of the workshops, there's certain things that we have to fund in the council in terms of teachers and social workers, but there's also things we can change and do differently, and we're really keen to hear that through the budget process. So to answer your final question, yes, I think direct action, politicians' ears prick up when you've got 100 people telling you they want something done rather than the odd email. And so direct action for me is a successful way of getting things challenged.
Yeah, due respect, Cami, I suspect that the question when it asked about direct action to stop evictions maybe didn't have petitions in mind. It maybe had something just a little bit more direct in mind. How do you feel about that?
How do I feel about evictions?
About direct action to stop, for example, to stop bailiffs getting into a house.
Yeah, I mean, it has happened here in your house. There's a guy just across the road at the Alamo, I think it was called, and a number of people here will witness that. And, you know, I don't think evicting anybody from their house is the best way to go. There must be an alternative. There must be support we can put in place. And yeah, I suppose as a councillor, we need to get our rents and our payments come into the council, and eviction will always be the last piece of action we need to take. But in some cases, that will need to be done. But I suppose it's for local people here to decide whether direct action is the best way forward.
Let's get some views from the audience. Susan.
Is it switched on? I'm ever so sorry, but that's bollocks. I live in what we call the Hood, and I have had letters from your council threatening to evict me for a 92 pence shortness in my rent, whereas I live next door to a drug dealer who's murdered people and dumped them on my doorstep and painted swastikas everywhere, and they tell me they can't evict him because he has rights. I think your priorities are a bit skewed, because in a block of flats like that, 2 or 3 drug dealers destroy the lives of the other 50 households that are trying to live normally. I think you should give that some thought.